There is a kind of pain that doesn't make noise. It doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't demand attention. It just settles in, quietly. It shows up in the pauses between thoughts. In the moments when nothing is wrong on the surface, but something feels off underneath. A subtle weight that follows you through the day. This is what it feels like when someone disappears without saying goodbye. No explanation, no final conversation, no clear moment where things officially ended. Just absence. And absence like this doesn't behave like normal loss. It doesn't come with rules. It doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't give your mind a place to land. So it lingers. You may notice it in small, almost invisible ways. Reaching for your phone without realizing why. Pausing mid-thought because you almost included them in it. Feeling a reaction before remembering they're no longer there. It's strange how the body remembers before the mind catches up. And maybe what confuses you most is that nothing happened in a clear way. There was no argument you can point to. No dramatic ending. No final sentence that closed the door. From the outside, it can look like nothing at all. But inside, something stopped without warning. That kind of silence creates a different kind of pain. One that doesn't scream. One that doesn't demand attention from others. But one that quietly rearranges how you feel inside yourself. You may have tried to explain it to someone and found yourself struggling for words. Because how do you describe missing something that never officially ended? How do you explain pain that doesn't have a clear story? So instead, you keep it to yourself. And that's often where the exhaustion begins. Not because the pain is overwhelming, but because it's constant. A low-level tension that never fully leaves. A sense of unfinished business that follows you from room to room. Your mind may circle the same questions again and again. Not aggressively, just patiently. Did I miss something? Was there a moment I didn't see? Did I matter as much as I thought? These questions don't always come as thoughts. Sometimes they appear as heaviness in the chest. A tiredness that sleep doesn't touch. A quiet distraction that makes it hard to fully focus on anything else. And if you felt this, it's important to say something gently and clearly. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. This kind of pain doesn't mean you're stuck. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're holding on too tightly. It means something meaningful ended without being acknowledged. And the human system doesn't know what to do with endings that were never named. Not everyone feels this kind of absence. Some people move on quickly, not because they don't care, but because they don't register emotional gaps the same way. They close chapters easily. They accept silence as an answer. But others don't. Others notice when energy disappears without explanation. They feel when a connection dissolves quietly. They sense when something unfinished remains in the air. This kind of pain often appears in people who connect deeply. People who are present when they care. People who don't half-feel relationships. When you connect like that, absence doesn't feel empty. It feels incomplete. And incompleteness creates tension, because the mind keeps searching for a missing piece it was never given. That search can be exhausting. You might find yourself replaying moments without trying to. Not obsessively, just automatically. Conversations that didn't feel like goodbyes. Messages that stopped abruptly. Small shifts that didn't make sense at the time. And each replay isn't about wanting to go back. It's about trying to understand what changed. Silence doesn't answer that question. It only amplifies it, and over time, silence can turn inward. Instead of asking, what happened? The question slowly becomes, what's wrong with me? That shift is subtle, and dangerous, because silence is neutral, but the mind isn't. When there's no explanation, the mind fills the space. And often, it fills it with self-blame. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I misread things. Maybe I mattered less than I thought. These thoughts don't arrive loudly. They slip in quietly. They feel reasonable. They feel logical, but they're not conclusions. They're placeholders. They exist because there was no ending to replace them. And it's important to notice this without judgment. Because feeling this way doesn't mean you're exaggerating. It means you are responding to ambiguity. The human system doesn't like open loops. Unfinished stories stay active in the background. They consume energy without you realizing it. That's why this kind of pain often feels like emotional fatigue rather than heartbreak. You're not devastated. You're drained. You still function. You still show up. You still do what needs to be done. But something inside feels constantly engaged. Like a program that never shuts off. And because the pain isn't dramatic, it's easy to dismiss it. To tell yourself it shouldn't matter anymore. That you should be over it. But unresolved absence doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't disappear because you demand it to. It doesn't leave because time passed. It softens only when it's acknowledged. Not solved, not explained, just recognized. And recognition doesn't mean deciding what it all means. It simply means allowing yourself to notice that something ended without closure. That something meaningful stopped without being named. That silence left a mark. This experience doesn't happen to everyone. Some people only feel loss when it's obvious. When there's a clear break. Clear words. Clear reasons. Others feel loss when something simply goes missing. When presence turns into absence quietly. When connection dissolves without warning. If this resonates, it may be because you're someone who perceives subtle shifts. Someone who notices what others overlook. Someone who senses emotional changes before they're spoken. That sensitivity isn't something to label or explain. It's simply a way of experiencing the world. And it comes with weight. Because people like this often feel things that don't have names. They carry impressions rather than facts. They respond to what's felt, not just what's said. So when someone disappears without saying goodbye, it doesn't just remove a person. It disrupts a sense of continuity. A shared rhythm. A quiet understanding. A place where attention once flowed. And when that disappears without explanation, the system stays alert. Waiting. Not because you're stuck, but because nothing officially told you it was over. That waiting can be subtle. It can look like emotional numbness. Like hesitation to fully engage elsewhere. Like a quiet distance you don't remember choosing. And none of this means you want the person back. It means part of you is still holding space for an ending that never arrived. That space takes energy. So if you felt unusually tired, if your mind drifts back without permission, if silence still feels heavier than it should, there is a reason. You are responding to something unfinished. And right now, you don't need to resolve it. You don't need clarity. You don't need answers. You don't need to decide what it all meant. You're allowed to pause inside the not knowing. To acknowledge that something mattered. That its disappearance affected you. That the lack of explanation left a trace. Sometimes, that acknowledgement alone creates a small release. Not relief. Not closure. Just a slight softening. A sense that the weight makes sense, even if the story doesn't. And maybe that's enough for this moment. Not to move on. Not to let go. Not to make peace with it. Just to sit here, for a few minutes, without pushing yourself to feel differently. To recognize that this kind of pain doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to those who notice when something real ends quietly. And if, as you listen, you feel even a little less alone. A little less tense. A little more understood. That doesn't mean the story is finished. It simply means you're not carrying it by yourself right now. There is still something here to understand. But it doesn't need to be understood tonight. There is a quiet confusion that settles in when someone disappears without explanation. Not confusion about what happened on the surface, but confusion about what to do with everything that was left behind. Because when there is no goodbye, there is no instruction for the mind. No signal that says where to place the memories. No marker that tells the body it can relax. So part of you stays alert. Not anxious, not panicked, just awake. You might notice it in moments that should feel calm. When the day finally slows down. When there is nothing demanding your attention. Instead of relief, there is a low hum inside. A sense of waiting without knowing what you're waiting for. That waiting isn't intentional. You're not expecting a message. You're not hoping for an apology. It's more subtle than that. It's the system holding space for something that never arrived. When someone leaves without saying goodbye, the relationship doesn't end cleanly. It fades. And fading doesn't give closure. Fading creates uncertainty. You may notice that you replay the same moments, not emotionally, but quietly. Not with intensity, but with curiosity. Trying to locate the moment where things shifted. Trying to understand when presence turned into distance. And sometimes, the hardest part is realizing there wasn't a single moment. Just a slow withdrawal, a change in tone, less effort, less response. Until one day, there was nothing left to respond to. That realization can feel disorienting. Because it removes the idea that endings are clear. It challenges the belief that if something matters, it will be acknowledged. And when that belief breaks, something inside you adjusts. You may find yourself questioning your perception. Not dramatically, just quietly. Did I feel more than they did? Did I read too much into it? Did I imagine the closeness? These questions don't come from insecurity. They come from inconsistency, from experiencing connection followed by disappearance. The mind tries to reconcile those two realities. And when it can't, it turns inward. That inward turn can feel heavy. Not sharp pain, just weight. You might feel emotionally slower than before. More cautious, less eager to open up. Not because you don't want connection, but because part of you learned that connection can dissolve without warning. That lesson doesn't announce itself. It integrates silently. You may notice you listen more carefully now. Watch patterns more closely. Pay attention to subtle changes in others. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Because once you've experienced disappearance without explanation, you become sensitive to early signs. And that sensitivity can be tiring. It keeps part of your attention outward, scanning, checking, noticing, even when nothing is wrong. And this can create a quiet loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of carrying something others don't see. Because silent endings are hard to explain. If you say someone disappeared, people often want details. A reason, a story, but there isn't one, just silence. And silence doesn't translate well. So you may stop talking about it altogether. Not because it doesn't matter, but because explaining it feels exhausting. And when something matters but remains unspoken, it stays active inside. That activity consumes energy. You might notice that you're more tired than usual. That small things feel heavier. That motivation comes and goes. Not because you're depressed, but because part of you is still processing something unfinished. Unfinished experiences don't demand attention loudly. They demand it quietly. They sit in the background, running. And background processes are easy to underestimate. Another thing that often happens is a shift in how you remember the person. Not idealizing them, not resenting them, just holding a blurred image. Because without an ending, memory has no boundary. You may remember good moments and feel nothing. Then suddenly feel something later, without warning. This inconsistency can be confusing. You might wonder why some days feel lighter and others feel heavier. Why some memories pass easily while others linger. This isn't regression, it's fluctuation. Unresolved experiences move in waves. And waves don't follow logic. They follow rhythm. Some days, the absence feels distant. Other days, it feels near again. Not because you're stuck, but because the system never received a final signal. So it checks in from time to time. You might also notice that you resist labeling the experience. Was it a relationship? A connection? Something undefined? Without a label, there's nowhere to place it. And without placement, it stays suspended. Suspension is uncomfortable. It keeps you between states. Not holding on, not letting go, just existing in between. And existing in between takes effort. You might crave certainty more than before. Not in others, in yourself. A sense of internal grounding. A feeling that things make sense. Because when something ends without explanation, it can shake your trust in continuity. You realize that meaning can disappear. That presence can fade. That not everything ends with clarity. That realization doesn't make you cynical. It makes you aware. And awareness comes with responsibility. You start noticing emotional dynamics more clearly. You pick up on what's not said. You sense when someone is pulling away before they admit it. This awareness can feel isolating. Because you see things others ignore. And you feel things others dismiss. So when you experience disappearance, it lands deeper. Not because you feel more, but because you register more. And this isn't something to explain or justify. It's simply how some people are wired. They don't move through relationships lightly. They feel transitions fully. And when transitions are interrupted, they carry the interruption. If you've been feeling like something inside you is still adjusting, like your emotional posture has shifted slightly, like you're more inward than before, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you adapted. You adapted to an experience that didn't come with guidance. And adaptation takes time. You may also notice moments where you feel oddly detached from future possibilities. Not pessimistic, just cautious. As if part of you wants proof before trusting again. That proof isn't about safety. It's about consistency. You learned that consistency isn't guaranteed. And learning that changes how you engage. Again, not dramatically, subtly. And subtle changes are often the hardest to notice and validate. Because they don't come with language. They come with feeling, a slight distance, a pause before responding, a preference for emotional simplicity. You may find comfort in quiet routines now, in predictability, in things that don't disappear. That makes sense. When something meaningful fades without warning, stability becomes soothing. Not exciting, soothing. And it's okay if you don't know what this experience means yet. Meaning doesn't arrive on command. Sometimes, it emerges slowly, through awareness rather than answers. Right now, all you need to know is that your response makes sense. Not logically, emotionally. You are responding to ambiguity, to silence, to absence, and those are powerful experiences. They don't shout, they whisper, but whispers can shape us just as deeply. So if you feel quieter than you used to, if your emotions feel less dramatic but more persistent, if your energy feels spread thin, there is context for that. You're carrying something unresolved, and you don't need to resolve it today. You don't need to interpret it. You don't need to frame it as a lesson. You don't need to turn it into growth. You can simply let it be what it is. An experience that mattered, An ending that never arrived. A silence that left an imprint. Allowing that truth to exist doesn't trap you in it. It gives it space. And space reduces pressure, not by fixing the pain, but by stopping the struggle against it. You're allowed to rest inside the uncertainty. To stop asking yourself to feel differently. To stop measuring your progress. There is no timeline for unfinished things. They resolve when they do. Or they soften. Or they change shape. For now, it's enough to acknowledge that something real disappeared quietly. And that affected you. That acknowledgement doesn't close the story. It simply makes the weight a little easier to carry. There is still something here to understand. But it doesn't need to be understood tonight. For this moment, it's enough to sit with it. And not be alone.